My beloved child, stay with me for a moment, because there is something about the person closest to your heart that you may have sensed without ever being able to explain. They have been carrying a truth inside them, replaying the same thoughts again and again, wondering whether they should finally tell you or keep pretending that everything is fine. And the strangest part is this: the truth may not be what you expect. It is not simply about what happened between you. It is about something they have been feeling for a long time but were too afraid to place into words. You may have noticed the silence, the sudden distance, the moments when they seemed present but emotionally somewhere else. Maybe their replies changed. Maybe they started hiding their feelings behind ordinary conversations. Maybe they looked at you as if they wanted to say something, then suddenly changed the subject. Those little moments were not meaningless. Something has been building underneath them. As this unfolds, clarity will come. And I want you to listen carefully, because the first revelation is connected to the one question they have secretly asked themselves again and again: what if I tell them everything, and they never look at me the same way again? That fear has been stronger than their desire to speak. They have imagined your reaction. They have imagined your silence. They have imagined losing the connection altogether. And that is why they have chosen the easier path, keeping the truth locked inside. But keeping something hidden does not make the feeling disappear. It makes it heavier. And lately, that weight has become almost impossible for them to ignore. Here is where this becomes much deeper. Your soulmate may have been trying to convince themselves that they had moved on from a painful chapter, but something keeps bringing them back to you. A memory. A conversation. A particular moment when they realized your presence meant more than they had admitted. They remember something you said that you probably forgot completely. They remember the way you looked at them during a moment when they were struggling. They remember your patience. They remember the feeling of being understood without having to explain everything. And now they are realizing something they never expected: they were not afraid of losing you because they did not care. They were afraid of losing you because they cared too much. That is the painful truth they have been hiding. They have been pretending that their heart is under control when, privately, it has been asking for one thing: another chance to be honest. But there is another layer. They may believe they disappointed you in some way. They may believe they waited too long, stayed silent too long, or allowed circumstances to create distance that never needed to exist. And every time they think about approaching you, an old doubt rises inside them: what if it is already too late? That question has been eating away at their confidence. They are not necessarily hiding the truth because they want to deceive you. They may be hiding it because they do not know how to face the emotional consequences of finally admitting it. This may resonate as we continue, especially if you have recently felt an unusual shift in the connection. Because sometimes the biggest changes begin silently, long before anyone speaks. But now comes the part you were not expecting. There is a possibility that your soulmate has already made a private decision about you, but they have not revealed it yet because they are waiting for the right moment. They have been watching for a sign that it is safe to open their heart. They want to know whether you would listen without immediately judging the past. They want to know whether there is still a place for their honesty in your life. And this is why their behavior may have seemed confusing. One moment they seem ready to come closer, and the next they pull back. One day they feel brave enough to imagine a future, and the next day their old fears return. It is an emotional battle happening behind a calm exterior. And somewhere inside that battle is a sentence they have never had the courage to say directly to you: I never stopped caring. Think about that for a moment. Not every silence means indifference. Not every distance means the connection is finished. Sometimes people become quiet because they are trying to understand feelings that are too large for ordinary words. Your soulmate may have realized that what they feel for you cannot simply be dismissed as a passing emotion. They may have tried to distract themselves, focus on other things, or convince themselves that time would erase it. But time did something completely different. It made them understand the value of what they had. Something huge is waiting for you, but before that revelation can come, there is one more piece of the story that needs to be uncovered. The painful truth may involve something they regret, not because they wanted to hurt you, but because they now understand that their silence itself may have hurt you. And that realization is becoming harder for them to carry. So listen closely, because this is where the emotional tension reaches another level. The truth they are hiding may ultimately be a confession of regret, longing, and fear all at once. They may want to tell you that there were moments when they almost reached out but stopped themselves. There were words typed and never sent. There were conversations imagined but never started. There were nights when they wondered whether you were thinking about them too. And perhaps the most painful realization of all is that they may have mistaken your silence for rejection when you were simply protecting your own heart. Two people can care deeply about each other and still become separated by hesitation, pride, timing, and fear. That is why this story is not ending with the silence. The silence is actually where the next chapter begins. Because when someone spends enough time hiding a truth, eventually the truth starts asking to be released. Your soulmate may be reaching that point now. They are beginning to understand that pretending not to care is costing them more than being honest ever could. And if they finally speak, the conversation may reveal something that changes the way you understand the entire connection. Not because everything suddenly becomes perfect, but because you finally discover what was happening behind the scenes. So do not rush past this message. Stay with me for a moment, because the next revelation goes directly into the reason they have been holding back, and once that reason becomes clear, you may finally understand why their behavior has felt so different lately. The truth has been hidden, but it has not disappeared. And when it finally comes to the surface, one question will remain: what will you do when the person you thought had forgotten you finally admits that they never truly did? My beloved child, something has shifted inside this connection, and your soulmate is beginning to realize that staying silent is becoming harder than telling you the truth. There is a thought they keep returning to whenever your memory appears. If I had been honest sooner, would everything be different today? That question has been quietly following them. They may look completely normal from the outside, but inside, they have been having a conversation with themselves that nobody else can hear. They are remembering the moments they could have spoken but chose silence. They are remembering opportunities they allowed to pass because they were afraid of what your response might be. And now they are beginning to understand that their silence may have created a story in your mind that was never true. You may have believed they stopped caring. You may have thought they had moved on. You may even have wondered whether the connection meant anything to them at all. But the truth they have been hiding is almost the opposite. They cared so deeply that they became afraid of revealing just how deeply they cared. Stay with me for a moment, because there is another layer here that changes everything. Your soulmate may have been carrying guilt over something they never properly explained. Perhaps they made a decision that created distance. Perhaps they listened to someone else's opinion when they should have listened to their own heart. Perhaps they allowed circumstances to convince them that walking away was easier than fighting for what mattered. Whatever the exact situation may be, the emotional result is the same: they have been questioning themselves. And lately, one realization has become impossible to ignore: they miss the version of themselves that existed when they felt truly understood by you. Now listen carefully, because this is where the hidden truth becomes more personal. Your soulmate may not only regret what they did, they may regret what they failed to do. They failed to tell you how important you were. They failed to explain their silence. They failed to show you what was happening behind their calm expression. And they may have assumed you would somehow understand without them saying anything. But people cannot read hearts. They can only respond to what they are shown. This is the lesson your soulmate is beginning to understand. They may have expected you to wait forever while they figured themselves out, and now they are realizing how unfair that expectation was. Somewhere inside, they know you deserved clarity. You deserved honesty. You deserved to know why things became complicated. And that realization has been weighing heavily on them. As this unfolds, clarity will come. You may soon understand why certain conversations never happened, why certain opportunities were missed, and why their behavior seemed completely different from what their heart was actually feeling. There may have been moments when they wanted to say, "Please don't give up on me," but instead they stayed quiet. There may have been moments when they wanted to tell you, "I still think about you," but fear stopped them. And perhaps the most surprising part is that they may have been waiting for you to make the first move because they were terrified of discovering that you no longer wanted them in your life. They were protecting themselves from rejection while unknowingly creating the very distance they feared. And now comes the part that could make this entire situation look different. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that they cannot control how you will respond, but they can control whether they finally become honest. That realization can create a powerful turning point. They may be preparing themselves for a conversation they have postponed for far too long. Not necessarily a dramatic confession filled with perfect words, but something much more real, a moment where the walls finally come down. They may tell you about the confusion they experienced. They may admit that they were scared. They may acknowledge that they handled certain things poorly. And they may finally reveal the one feeling they tried hardest to hide: they never became emotionally indifferent to you. This is why the connection may have continued to feel unfinished. Sometimes closure does not arrive because the story has ended, sometimes it is delayed because something important was never said. This may resonate as we continue, especially if you have recently experienced a strange feeling that something is about to change. But remember, the biggest revelation may not be the words themselves. It may be the emotion behind them. When someone has carried a truth for a long time, finally speaking, it can feel like releasing a weight they have been carrying alone. Your soulmate may have spent so much time wondering whether you still care that they forgot to ask themselves the more important question: what happens if I never tell them at all? And that question may be the reason their silence is finally beginning to break. There is one final thought I want you to hold on to before we continue deeper into this story. Your soulmate may have discovered that what hurts most is not the distance between you, it is knowing that the distance might have been avoidable. They may look back and realize that one honest conversation could have changed everything. One moment of courage could have prevented months of confusion. One sentence could have told you what their silence never could. And now, they are standing emotionally at that exact crossroads. Something huge is waiting for you, but it may begin with something very simple: honesty. If this message is resonating with you, take a moment to support this video by sharing it with someone who may need to hear these words, and leave a comment if you feel that an unfinished conversation has been sitting quietly in your heart too. And if you want to continue following this story as the hidden truth unfolds, subscribe and stay connected, because the next part goes even deeper into the reason your soulmate has been carrying this secret, and why they may finally be reaching the point where keeping it hidden is no longer an option. The truth is getting closer to the surface. And when it finally comes out, you may realize that the silence you once misunderstood was actually hiding an emotion far stronger than you ever imagined. My beloved child, there is a reason the silence has felt different lately, and this is where the story begins to reveal what your soulmate has been unable to explain. They may have convinced everyone around them that they are perfectly fine, but when they are alone, their thoughts return to you. They replay old conversations, remember tiny details you probably never realized mattered, and wonder whether you still think about them the way they think about you. The painful truth is that they may have been carrying a secret regret, not because they stopped loving or caring, but because they allowed their fear to speak louder than their heart. Stay with me for a moment, because the next revelation is something they may never have admitted openly. There was likely a point when they wanted to come closer to you, but something inside them said, not yet. Maybe they thought they needed more time. Maybe they believed circumstances would eventually become easier. Maybe they were waiting for the perfect moment. But the perfect moment never arrived, and every day they waited made the distance feel heavier. Now they are realizing that waiting had a cost. They are beginning to understand. That realization has been painful. They may wonder whether you have already emotionally moved forward. They may wonder whether they still have a place in your life. And that uncertainty is precisely what has been keeping them awake inside their own thoughts. But there is something even deeper they have been hiding. Your soulmate may have been afraid that if they told you the complete truth, you would discover how vulnerable they actually became because of this connection. They did not want you to know how often they thought about you. They did not want you to know that ordinary places, songs, conversations, or familiar moments could suddenly remind them of you. They did not want you to know that they sometimes imagined what would happen if the two of you finally sat down and said everything you had both been holding back. Why hide something so emotional? Because admitting it would mean admitting that you still matter. And for someone who has spent a long time trying to appear strong, that admission can feel enormous. As this unfolds, clarity will come. The truth may be less about another person and more about an internal struggle they have been fighting quietly. They may have been battling their own hesitation, their own regrets, and their own fear of making the wrong decision again. Perhaps they once believed that staying silent would protect both of you from disappointment. But now they are discovering that silence does not always protect a connection. Sometimes it creates more questions than answers. And those unanswered questions have become the very thing they cannot escape. They may be asking themselves, what if I had just told them? What if they were waiting too? What if I misunderstood their silence? These questions are becoming louder, and each one brings them closer to the truth. Then comes the revelation that may change how you see their entire behavior. They may have been waiting for evidence that you still cared, while you were waiting for evidence that they cared. Think about how powerful that misunderstanding can become. Two people can stand on opposite sides of the same emotional door, both wanting it to open, yet neither one reaching for the handle. Your soulmate may now recognize that pattern. They may realize that their attempts to hide their feelings created confusion, and your attempts to protect your heart may have looked like rejection to them. This is why their emotions have been so complicated. They are not simply missing you. They are wondering whether they lost something meaningful because neither of you knew what the other was truly feeling at the time. This may resonate as we continue, especially if you have ever experienced a connection that felt unfinished even after long periods of silence. There is a strange kind of pain that comes from knowing you cared but never knowing whether the other person cared too. Your soulmate may have lived inside that uncertainty for longer than you realize. And now, instead of becoming easier with time, the question has become more intense. Should I finally tell them everything? They know the answer emotionally, but courage is another matter. They may be preparing themselves for the possibility that honesty could change everything. And even though that possibility frightens them, the idea of remaining silent forever may frighten them even more. So here is the part I want you to remember. Something huge is waiting for you, but the biggest change may begin before any message arrives, before any conversation happens, and before any confession is spoken. It begins with your soulmate finally accepting their own truth. They may no longer be able to pretend that this connection meant nothing. They may no longer be able to bury the regret of what was left unsaid. They may no longer want to keep carrying the emotional weight of wondering what could have been. And when someone reaches that point, their behavior can change in ways that are difficult to hide. They may become more reflective. They may suddenly want answers. They may revisit memories they once avoided. They may finally understand why certain moments stayed in their heart long after they were supposed to disappear. Stay with me for a moment, because we are approaching the part where the hidden truth begins to connect with a decision they have been quietly considering. The question is no longer simply whether they miss you. The question is whether they are finally ready to stop hiding what they feel. And once that decision becomes clear, you may understand why this connection has felt so emotionally unfinished all along.